in terms of adoption, in terms of fostering, in terms of child contact, supervising the meeting between the father and the mother who were at war with each other, but also setting up a model for early childhood services. And Diana, who I just met, was part of the work became part of the work that we did at Coram in the Parent Centre. So we created a partnership between Camden Council and Coram and created the first Early Excellence Centre. And those of you with long memories may remember Sure Start, which was launched there by the Prime Minister. So we were about not taking over the world, but about trying to create innovative services that could be evaluated and then rolled out more locally, more nationally. The adoption service has always been probably the best and biggest voluntary sector adoption service in the country, and still is. We prided ourselves on working with children who had very troubling starts in life and whose foster adopted parents were needing additional support when they took these children on, because very often in those days, if you adopted a child and things went pear-shaped, as so often happened, that was it, you were on your own. So those are the kinds of things that we were beginning to do, but we didn't have quite the same broader vision as the current ownership. I've lost my nose, I'll have to turn around this way. So, it now has called itself the Coram Group, and it's taken on a lot of additional organisations and merged them within it. But it builds on the work we did on adoption, working with young people in care, creative therapies and support for families. Now, this creative therapies is interesting. When we developed the Coram campus, as we call it, into an singing or dancing, bringing together all the services that young children need. We had health visitors on site, social workers visiting, psychologists working in the school and so on. But we also set up a music therapy service. Now, I'm not sure, I don't know how many of you know much about music therapy, but a lot of the young children we worked with were totally traumatised, especially the ones that we were placing for adoption, but also local children. Some were elective mutes. They were unable to communicate. They were sort of drawn into themselves. Now, a therapy session is not something you sit in on, but they're all videoed, and to watch the way in which this involvement with music, with its rhythms, regular rhythms, transformed young children from the first session to the end of the 10th session was just magical. And it became the first time that this had actually happened within a community setting, as opposed to being referred to mental health services. So today the organisation, it's got a big building programme. It took over the Voice of the Child in Care, an organisation particularly concerned to give young people a voice. The Children's Legal Centre, which you mentioned, which is based at the University of Essex. Life Education, which is working in a lot of schools, and Family and Childcare. And these are all organisations that existed in their own right, were struggling a bit with funding, but came under, if you like, the Coram umbrella. And as I mentioned right at the beginning, they've recently digitalised 500,000 records covering the lives of the 27,000 children from the hospital archive. So the website, I am in touch with them, I'm going there next week, but I thought I'd better take it off the website just so I got it right. So they do annual childcare surveys, a brilliant adoption service, life skills therapy, drama, and reading programs in schools nationwide, which obviously gives them a much wider scope than simply working with very challenged children and young people. Legal services, advocacy, and support for professionals. So a bigger and growing organisation, recently, not so long before her death, the Queen here, opening the Queen Elizabeth II Centre always helps if you call a building after whoever you want to open it, which is meeting the oldest for the founding and the youngest adopted child. It was a delightful mentioned Coram's Fields and how you couldn't go in. You can't go in. Here we are. No adults unless accompanied by a child. As I say, bought, I think it was by Lord Rothermere's wife, anyway, bought for the children and people of London when the family hospital main estate was sold. And a painting of the family hospital at the family museum, I'm sorry, with, I can't see very clearly, the statue of Thomas Coram here, and I think, that's right, there's the statue with the Coram organisation just behind it. Just to go back, when I joined Coram, this was the only building that we used. I sat in a room with what looked like a caminetto on the walls. There were the Hogarths and the Gainsboroughs and the Reynolds and so on, but we couldn't open it to the public because we couldn't afford to insure it because we were a childcare organisation. We hatched a plan that we would move into a rebuilt site on our campus next door, and that we would set up a separate charity to display the objects in support of Coram. Now, unfortunately, we got this agreed with the Charity Commission and the Heritage Lottery Fund that we're going to put money into it, that we could do this, lend the entire collection to this new charity on the understanding that it was paid back, or they bought it or within 25 years. One of the trustees we inherited from the Cambridge Adoption Society we took over said that all charities needed to use all their assets in support of their objects, correct, and that therefore we should sell the collection. Now, if that had gone ahead, every Oxford and Cambridge college, every church in the country would have had to sell things that they had spent their lives building up. So we called upon Frank Dobson, we called upon Tony Blair, the Blair government, I think it was after an election, changed the Solicitor General to Harriet Harman and the Attorney General to somebody I forget who, Faulkner perhaps. We had a debate in the House of Commons, and we had an affidavit from the top art collector in the world that said these artefacts, pictures, were given in support of the family hospital, and if they're split up, they won't be worth anything. I mean, the Coram picture alone is worth millions. So, the family, I spent a lot of time while I was there helping set the family museum up, and it was launched in 2004. So I think I've probably run over time. I can't remember now quite when I was supposed to stop. These slides I published a book just after, it's 20 years since I left now, it doesn't seem that long. I published a book, London's Forgotten Children, Thomas Coram and the Family Hospital, just after I retired. I think it was republished about 5 times, and it's been and when it was republished 2 years ago, they let me make a few alterations and write an extra chapter. Now, unfortunately, I didn't think about getting some new copies in soon enough. If any of you are in the direction of the Family Hospital, you can buy it there, or through a bookseller. I'm sorry I don't have it. Anyway, so thank you for listening. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. That was a wonderful talk. Any questions? Maybe over there. Anyone else after this person?
Yes, bear in mind I forgot my hearing aid, so I'm going to
Can I ask you how and when did you start to manage applications from children of ethnic minorities?
Right from the beginning, we made no distinction. We took in any children whose mothers brought them and who we felt fitted the criteria. I think there has been, or is about to be, a special exhibition at the Family Museum looking particularly at children, black and ethnic minority children, from the records. You can't always tell from the records because, yes, the colour of the skin is described on that simple form, But yes, right from the very beginning. I mean, I was reading something in the paper this morning about the numbers of young people who escaped off slave ships in the port of London, and how many there were in London, even back in Tudor times. And I think sometimes we think it's something that's quite a recent change in the makeup of our country. But yeah, there has been specialist research in that area, and if you wanted to contact the Family Museum, they'd definitely be able to tell you.
I think we have time for 3 more questions. There's one person here, another one at the back. Anyone on this side? Okay, this lady in the lot of listening going on. And then second row from the back.
Thank you for your talk. It was very fascinating on the history, but also equally fascinating on the current work of the foundation, which I, for one, was very ignorant of. Could you talk a little, just for a few seconds, about how the foundation intersects with organisations like social services and the family courts?
Yes, indeed. All voluntary organisations have this. I talked earlier about the 4 years when the governors were beholden to government because they had a grant. All voluntary organisations providing children's services, A, aim to raise as much money as they can so they can do what they want, and B, are contracted by government or local government to run services. So suddenly lost my thread there. Just remind me, sorry.
By the intersection.
Oh, intersection.
Yeah.
So whilst we were at Gorham, we did a lot of work with Camden because we were based in Camden, but we were contracted to completely run the adoption services of 5 or 6 local authorities, and it's now much bigger than that. Family courts is very interesting. We did 2 really innovative pieces of work there. The one I'll mention. When a child is placed for adoption, there is probably a mother who is struggling with mental health or drug issues. So we set up something called concurrent planning. Because on the whole, these children ping-ponged backwards and forwards. Mum was okay for a bit, let's take the child back. No, she's not okay, let's put her back in foster care. And we devised with Nick Crichton, who was a district judge, brilliant man, with the London family courts, that we would set up this scheme, which is now spread quite widely, that the mother would be given 9 months with social services support to kick a drug habit, help her mental health issues, whatever. And the adopted parents took the child, the baby, knowing that if it worked, that it would go back to mum. But hoping, obviously, from their point of view, that it didn't work. And this is a way of putting the onus on improvement on the adult rather than the child having to ping-pong backwards and forwards. And that's just one example. But if you're working in the voluntary sector, you can't. We're trying to set up a specialist fostering scheme in 3 London boroughs with young people who would otherwise be in secure accommodation. But that needed health, social services, education, psychiatrists, all to work together. Nightmare.
Thank you. There's one more question. The lady at the back there, put your hand up.
Thank you. I was really
Thank you. I was particularly fascinated by the music therapy project, and my first music teacher was Juliette Alvin, who was a cellist, so presumably she was involved in this because she stopped teaching kids and went completely over to music therapy. Was that so?
I don't know. I may have known once and I may have forgotten. My daughter is musical and I kept encouraging her to become a music therapist, but she quite rightly did what she wanted to do, not what I wanted her to do. So there's a huge hinterland of work around music therapy. What we tried to do was to build a community-based services built on the accepted models of the most effective way of using music therapy to work with challenged children.
Okay, I think we have to stop there. I'd like to thank Dame and Julie and you for a fascinating talk. Thank you very much for telling us all about Gorham.
Thank you.